You ever wonder about those weird things in the past, like strange facts and mysteries that seem to pop out of nowhere? Imagine this: a band of nomads, famous for their lightning-fast raids and fierce archery, suddenly decide to put down roots and build a European kingdom. They weren't just any kingdom either, but one that would become a major player on the continent for centuries. It's a tale full of sudden turns, brutal battles, and surprising moments of peace, all played out against a backdrop of sweeping plains and dense forests. We're going on a journey through the entire history of medieval Hungary, and trust me, it's a story you're going to want to hear all the way to the end. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Maybe someone from across the globe is listening right now too. So let's start with the beginnings. Long before Hungary was, well, Hungary, the people we call the Magyars were living somewhere east of the Ural Mountains. They were a Finno-Ugric people, nomadic and skilled horsemen, and they spent their days in a wide expanse of land, herding their animals and living a life on the move. They weren't a single unified group at first, but rather a collection of tribes that shared a language and a way of life. They were tough, resourceful, and knew how to survive in a harsh environment. Their world was one of endless horizons, where the sky met the plains in a seamless line, and the seasons dictated every movement. They were a force of nature, and their reputation would soon spread far and wide. As the 9th century rolled on, the Magyars began their great migration, driven by pressures from other nomadic tribes, most notably the Pechenegs. This was no leisurely stroll. It was a desperate, eastward flight that eventually led them into the Carpathian Basin. Their arrival wasn't exactly a secret. It was more like a loud, boisterous, and very sudden party that no one had been invited to. The Carpathian Basin at the time was a patchwork of Slavic, Avar, and Frankish territories. It was a diverse place, but it was also politically fragmented and ripe for the picking. The Magyars, under the leadership of their chieftain, Arpad, saw an opportunity. They weren't just passing through. They were home shopping, and they liked what they saw. One can almost picture Arpad looking around at the lush plains and thinking, yeah, this is the place. Let's make this work. The process of settling down was, as you might imagine, not without its complications. The native populations weren't exactly thrilled to have these new, formidable neighbors moving in. But the Magyars had a significant advantage: their military prowess. They were masters of mounted archery, a style of warfare that was incredibly effective for hit-and-run tactics. They could appear out of nowhere, unleash a hail of arrows, and vanish before the enemy could even mount a proper defense. It was the ancient world's version of guerrilla warfare, and it worked brilliantly. The legendary Hungarian fables of their origins, while perhaps not 100% historically accurate, paint a vivid picture of this time, full of mythical animals and epic heroes. It's the kind of story that makes you want to cozy up with a blanket and get lost in the past. Historians still argue whether the initial settlement was a series of planned conquests or a more gradual infiltration. But what is clear is that by the early 10th century, The Magyars had firmly established control over the Carpathian Basin. Arpad, the chieftain who had led them there, became a legendary figure, the founding father of what would become a powerful dynasty. His name would echo through the centuries, a constant reminder of the people who chose to trade a life on the endless steppe for a home they could call their own. Their new home, nestled in the heart of Central Europe, was strategically positioned. It was a natural fortress, surrounded by mountains and rivers, which gave them a great defensive advantage. Of course, it also put them in a prime spot well, for causing a little chaos in the neighborhood. They were about to make a lot of new friends and a lot more enemies through their famous raids. It was a brave new world for them, and they were ready to take it on, one raid at a time. This wasn't just a story about settling down. It was a story about a people finding their purpose, their place in a world that was rapidly changing. After settling into the Carpathian Basin, the Magyars, under the continued leadership of Arpad, found themselves in a unique position. They had a new home, but old habits die hard. Their nomadic heritage, combined with the pressures of their new neighbors and the sheer military might they possessed, meant that they weren't exactly content to just farm and tend to their herds. Instead, they began what would become a series of adventures that modern historians call the Hungarian raids into Europe. And when I say raids, I'm not talking about a couple of guys in a canoe. This was a full-scale shock and awe campaign that sent tremors all the way from Spain to Constantinople. Imagine, for a moment, the surprise of a Frankish nobleman as a swarm of mounted archers, seemingly appearing out of thin air, descended upon his lands, their bows singing a deadly tune. These raids weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated, strategic, and remarkably effective. The Magyars' military tactics were a thing of beauty, at least from their perspective. They would use feigned retreats to lure their opponents into a trap, where they would be surrounded and cut down by a relentless volley of arrows. This was a style of warfare completely alien to the heavily armored, slow-moving armies of Western Europe. The European knights, for all their bravado and heavy swords, were simply no match for the speed and agility of the Magyar cavalry. It must have been like trying to swat a fly with a hammer. Their raids often went deep into enemy territory, bypassing fortified cities and targeting undefended towns and monasteries, which were, of course, full of valuable stuff. One of the most famous of these raids took them all the way to present-day Spain, and another to the outskirts of Constantinople, which, let's be honest, takes some serious guts. The raids, which lasted from the late 9th century into the middle of the 10th, served multiple purposes. They provided a steady flow of wealth, slaves, and livestock, enriching the Magyar tribes and their leaders. They also helped to consolidate power within the Carpathian Basin itself. By participating in these raids, the various Magyar chieftains and warriors were united by a common goal and a shared sense of identity. This period of widespread raiding also established the Magyars as a powerful new force in Europe, a people to be feared and, in some cases, to be paid off to go bother someone else. For example, some German kings and emperors chose to pay them a tribute, a sort of medieval protection racket, rather than face their wrath on the battlefield. It was a pretty good gig for the Magyars while it lasted. One of the turning points in this era was the Battle of Lechfeld in 955. After a decades-long run of success, the Magyars met a formidable force led by King Otto I of Germany. It was a massive, bloody battle, and for the first time, the Magyar raiding army was decisively defeated. This wasn't just a minor setback. It was a major strategic blow. Their best warriors were killed. Their military reputation was shattered. And it became clear that the old ways of life were no longer sustainable. Historians still argue whether this defeat was the sole reason for the end of the raids, or if the Magyars were already transitioning away from them, but it certainly accelerated the process. It's a bit like a band realizing their one-hit wonder isn't going to get them a full album deal. The raids were fun. They were profitable for a while, but they couldn't be the foundation of a lasting state. The Magyars had to figure out a new game plan, a way to survive and thrive in a continent that was increasingly organized and unified under the banner of Christianity. They had conquered a new home, but now they had to learn how to be good neighbors, or at least how to be a bit less raidy. This marked the end of their freewheeling, horseback riding lifestyle, and the beginning of a much more serious, settled existence. A shift that would be guided by one man who understood that if they were going to last, they would need to become a part of the European family, not a threat to it. With the devastating defeat at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, the Magyars stood at a crossroads. The lucrative old way of life was no longer a viable option. The freewheeling, horseback riding lifestyle of the raiders was being replaced by a more stable, sedentary existence. The tribes had settled in the Carpathian Basin, but their society was still largely pagan and tribal, a stark contrast to the burgeoning Christian kingdoms around them. If they were to survive as a people and a state, they had to adapt, and fast. The person who saw this most clearly was Grand Prince Géza. He wasn't a king yet, but he was the leader of the Magyars, and he had a vision for their future that went beyond just surviving. He wanted to make them a part of the European family, a player on the continent's political stage, not just a menace on its periphery. Géza's reign, which began in 972, was a period of transition. He understood that the key to survival wasn't raiding, but diplomacy and integration. He made peace with the Holy Roman Empire, a crucial step toward de-escalation, and began the slow, deliberate process of converting his people to Christianity. This wasn't an easy task. The Magyars were deeply attached to their traditional beliefs, their pagan gods, and their shamanic rituals, convincing them to abandon a way of life that had served them for centuries was a Herculean effort. Géza, however, was a pragmatist. He invited Christian missionaries into the country, particularly from Germany, and began building churches. It was a top-down approach. He himself was baptized, and he encouraged his nobles to follow suit. But he was also canny, and historians still debate whether his conversion was a matter of true faith or purely a political move, maybe a bit of both. The old legends say that he was so ambivalent that when asked why he worshipped both the Christian God and the pagan ones, he simply replied, I'm rich enough to afford both. A good joke for the time, but it hints at the complex balancing act he was performing. His efforts weren't just about faith, they were about state building. Adopting Christianity meant adopting the political and social structures that came with it. It meant a more centralized form of government, a written legal code, and a more organized military. It meant building a foundation for a kingdom, not just a confederation of tribes. Caesar was laying the groundwork, bit by bit, for his son, Vike, who would later become the first king. He was the bridge between the wild, raider past and the settled, royal future. He was a savvy ruler, a man who knew how to play the long game. He also established a new capital at Esztergom, a strategic location on the Danube River, which would become a center of power and religion. His actions weren't always popular, and there were certainly traditionalists who resisted the changes. But Caesar was firm in his resolve. He saw the way the wind was blowing, and he steered his ship accordingly. The most important of Caesar's moves, however, was arranging the marriage of his son, Vike, to Gisela of Bavaria, a sister of the future Holy Roman Emperor, Henry II. This was more than just a wedding. It was a political alliance of the highest order. It cemented the relationship with the most powerful state in Europe and provided a clear signal to the world that Hungary was no longer a pagan backwater, but a country with connections and influence. This was the ultimate mic drop moment for Caesar's diplomacy. It was a statement that said, "We're here to stay, and we're going to do it our way, but with a little help from our new friends." Caesar's reign, while not yet a golden age, was the essential first step on a long and winding road toward nationhood. He took a group of nomadic warriors and set them on the path to becoming a recognized Christian kingdom. The stage was now set for his son, who would take the final, monumental leap from Grand Prince to King. A move that would define the next 1,000 years of Hungarian history. After Grand Prince Caesar's cautious and pragmatic reforms, the stage was set for his son, Vike, to take the throne. Vike, however, would not be content to simply continue his father's work. He had a much grander vision: to transform the Magyars from a confederation of tribes into a single, unified, and respected Christian kingdom. In the year 1000, or perhaps 1001, historians still argue about the exact date, which is just a perfect example of how messy history can be. He did something no Magyar leader had done before. With the blessing of Pope Sylvester II, he was crowned the first king of Hungary, taking the name Stephen III. It was a monumental event, a symbolic moment that severed the old ties to the nomadic, pagan past and firmly embraced the Christian European future. Imagine the ceremony, the solemnity, the weight of a crown on the head of a man who was once a grand prince of a people known for their raiding. It was a serious glow-up. Stephen's reign was not an easy one. He had to face down significant internal opposition from pagan chieftains and rivals who resented his centralized authority and his new religion. The most prominent of these was his own uncle, Kopani, who was a powerful tribal leader and a firm believer in the old ways. Kopani saw Stephen's coronation as a betrayal of their heritage and a move towards foreign dominance. He led a massive rebellion against the new king, rallying a significant portion of the pagan population. This wasn't just a political struggle, it was a culture war, a fight for the soul of the new nation. Stephen, however, was not only a devout Christian, but also a shrewd military commander. He had the support of Christian knights, including some from Germany, who were eager to help establish a new Christian kingdom in the heart of Europe. The conflict came to a head in the year 998, when Stephen's forces, led by his German brother-in-law, a count named Wenceslaus, decisively defeated Capani's army. The victory was a brutal one, and Capani was killed. To make an unforgettable point, his body was quartered and displayed at the gates of 4 different cities. It was a very stark message that pagan resistance was over. With the internal threats largely suppressed, Stephen could focus on building his new kingdom. He was an incredibly effective ruler, a true Renaissance man before the Renaissance even existed. He established a state administration based on the county system, with royal officials overseeing justice and tax collection. He founded bishoprics and archbishoprics, creating a strong ecclesiastical structure that was independent of German or Byzantine influence. He issued laws, including the decrees of King Stephen, which were designed to protect private property, enforce Christian morality, and create a stable, peaceful society. One of his more interesting decrees mandated that everyone must go to church every Sunday. If they didn't, they would be punished, which is a very my way or the highway approach to religious piety. He also established a new system of coinage, which further solidified the kingdom's economy and its place in European commerce. Perhaps Stephen's greatest legacy was his enduring commitment to Christianity. He wasn't just a king, he was a saint in the making. He saw the conversion of Hungary not as a political necessity, but as a divine mission. He established a system of monasteries and churches that would become centers of learning and culture. He was deeply devoted to his family, and when his only son, Emmerich, died tragically, it was a devastating blow that left the kingdom's future in question. His death also gave rise to the historical fact that we now know his heir was supposed to be his son, which left no one left to take the throne, a problem that would cause major issues later on. Despite this personal tragedy, Stephen's work endured. He had taken a disparate group of tribes and forged them into a single, unified state with a clear identity. He had moved Hungary from the fringes of Europe to its very heart. He was eventually canonized as Saint Stephen of Hungary, and to this day, he remains a revered figure, a symbol of the nation's founding and its Christian roots. His legacy wasn't just about a crown or a title. It was about the very idea of Hungary itself. With the passing of Saint Stephen the Vastatheres, the first king of Hungary, a period of instability followed. Stephen's centralizing rule and Christian reforms had laid the foundation for the kingdom, but they had not fully eradicated the old tribal loyalties and pagan traditions. The throne, now a prize coveted by many, was fought over by a series of claimants. The lack of a direct heir. Remember how his son, Emmerich, died tragically, left a vacuum that was quickly filled with ambition and conflict. This was a messy, frustrating time for the fledgling kingdom. It was like building a beautiful house and then watching everyone fight over who gets to live in the master bedroom. There were pagan revolts, often led by chieftains who saw the chance to return to the old ways. And there were endless power struggles between various cousins and in-laws of the royal family. One of the most notable revolts was the Vata Uprising in 1046, a brutal episode that saw the murder of a missionary bishop, Saint Gelert, who was reportedly rolled down a hill in a barrel full of nails. It was a very pointed protest against the new religion, to say the least. The kingdom teetered on the brink of collapse, pulled in different directions by internal strife and external pressure from the Holy Roman Empire. The German Emperor Henry III even tried to assert his suzerainty over Hungary, but he was successfully repelled. This period of turmoil highlights a crucial point. Building a kingdom is one thing, but making it last is an entirely different beast. The first few decades after Stephen's death were a test of the kingdom's resilience, and it was a test it barely passed. The succession issue was the main driver of the chaos, as different branches of the Abbad dynasty vied for control. The throne passed from one relative to another in quick succession, and each ruler had to contend with a new wave of rebellions and rival claims. It was a stressful time for everyone involved, especially for the people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. A few notable figures did emerge from this period of chaos, like King Andrew Gunther, who managed to temporarily stabilize the kingdom by defeating the Vata revolt, and King Belerthweth, who, despite a short reign, introduced important economic reforms. But it wasn't until the end of the 11th century that the kingdom finally found a strong, unifying leader who could build on Stephen's legacy. His name was Ladislaus, and his arrival on the scene was exactly what Hungary needed. He was a military hero and a devout Christian, and he would come to be seen as a second founder of the kingdom, almost as important as Stephen himself. Ladislaus, who reigned from 1077 to 1095, was a true Night King. He was known for his piety, his sense of justice, and his extraordinary physical strength. The legends say he was so tall he could look over a crowd with ease. He took the throne during a period of deep crisis and immediately set about restoring order. He defeated rival claimants, put down the remaining pagan revolts, and solidified the Christian identity of the nation. He was particularly harsh on those who reverted to paganism, but he was also a compassionate and fair-minded ruler. He issued a new set of laws that addressed issues of crime and property, and he strengthened the borders of the kingdom against both external and internal threats. He also expanded Hungary's territory, notably conquering Croatia and bringing it into a personal union with Hungary in 1091. This was a monumental achievement that would have a lasting impact on both nations. Historians still argue whether the union with Croatia was a conquest or a dynastic union based on treaty. But what's clear is that it significantly expanded the territory and power of the Hungarian crown. Ladislaus's reign marked a turning point. He not only brought peace and stability, but also gave the Hungarian people a new hero to rally around. He was eventually canonized as Saint Ladislaus III, a testament to his piety and his success in solidifying the Christian kingdom. His legacy was one of strength and righteousness, and he had successfully steered Hungary through its most vulnerable period, paving the way for the next generation of rulers who would continue to build on the foundations laid by Stephen and Ladislaus. It was a wild ride from Stephen's death to Ladislaus's reign, but the kingdom had proven its durability, and it was now ready for a new chapter of growth and consolidation. With the strong reign of Ladislaus providing stability, the Hungarian kingdom was finally on solid footing. After Ladislaus, his nephew, Koloman, took the throne in 1095. He was an unusual choice for a king in the medieval world, especially in a kingdom forged by warriors and conquerors. Koloman was known as the bookish or the learned, because unlike his predecessors, who were celebrated for their military prowess, Koloman was a scholar and a man of letters. He was originally destined for a career in the church, and he was reportedly so well versed in canon law that he could have been a bishop. The story goes that he was plucked from the monastery to become king, which is a bit like finding out the quarterback of a major sports team used to be in the debate club. This wasn't to say he was a weak ruler. Quite the contrary. Koloman proved to be a shrewd and effective leader who understood that a stable, well-governed state required more than just military might. His reign was marked by significant legal and administrative reforms. He issued a series of legal codes, collectively known as the Decrees of Koloman, which were designed to modernize the Hungarian legal system and bring it in line with the rest of Christian Europe. One of the most famous of these decrees stated, "Witches who do not exist should not be burned." This is a fascinating glimpse into a more progressive medieval mindset. While it seems simple to us now, this was a radical statement in a time when witch hunts were becoming more common. Historians still argue whether he meant that he didn't believe in witches at all, or if he was simply trying to distinguish between different types of magical practices. Either way, it shows a level of rational thought that was quite rare for the era. Koloman also implemented laws to protect private property, regulate trade, and enforce Christian morality, all of which helped to create a more stable and prosperous society. Koloman also had to deal with the chaos of the Crusades. The First Crusade was a huge, sprawling movement that swept across Europe, and a major route for the Crusaders passed directly through Hungary. It was a logistical nightmare for Koloman, who had to manage thousands of armed and often undisciplined pilgrims. He had to be both a host and a bouncer, trying to ensure they didn't cause too much trouble while they were passing through his kingdom. He even had to lead his own army to deal with unruly crusader bands, and his ability to do so without alienating the Christian world speaks volumes about his diplomatic skill. He also expanded the kingdom's territory, continuing the work of Ladislaus. He conquered parts of Dalmatia and Croatia, which further solidified Hungary's presence on the Adriatic coast and gave it greater control over vital trade routes. Koloman's reign was also a period of relative peace and prosperity. The economy flourished, and the kingdom's borders were largely secure. He was a patron of the arts and sciences, and his court was a center of learning. He was a different kind of king, one who understood that the future of his kingdom lay not in constant warfare, but in good governance, wise laws, and a strong cultural foundation. His reign was a perfect blend of practicality and intellect, and he showed that a king could be both a scholar and a strong ruler. He left a legacy of a more civilized and organized Hungary, a kingdom that was moving closer to its European neighbors in terms of its social and legal structures. He was a far cry from the raider chieftains of old, and his rule was a crucial step in the long, slow process of transforming a tribal society into a modern state. After his death, the Arpad dynasty continued to rule, but the foundation laid by Stephen, Ladislaus, and Koloman was now solid enough to withstand the next wave of challenges. Following the intellectually minded reign of Koloman the Bookish, the Arpad dynasty, which was now firmly established, continued to guide the Hungarian kingdom. This period, roughly spanning from the early 12th century to the Mongol invasion in 1241, saw the kingdom's institutions mature and its power expand. The Arpad kings were no longer just tribal chieftains. They were European monarchs, complete with all the trappings: a sophisticated court, a codified legal system, and an increasingly centralized bureaucracy. It was a time of consolidation and growth, a slow burn narrative where the details of administration and succession were just as important as the grand battles of the past. It's like a company transitioning from a scrappy startup to a stable, well-run corporation. The 12th century saw a series of rulers, each contributing to the kingdom's development. One of the more notable was Bela III, who reigned from 1172 to 1196. Bela had a very unusual path to the throne. He was raised at the Byzantine imperial court in Constantinople. This upbringing had a profound influence on his rule. He brought with him a taste for Byzantine ceremony and administration, and he introduced a more organized, hierarchical system of governance. He was the king who truly put the royal in the kingdom. He created a central chancellery, a royal office responsible for issuing official documents, which helped to streamline the government and assert the king's authority over local nobles. He also introduced a new system of revenue collection, and he kept meticulous records of his income and expenditures. This level of bureaucratic detail was a significant step forward for the Hungarian state. Bela III's strong ties with the Byzantine Empire had a clear impact on the country's culture and politics. He married a Byzantine princess, Agnes of Antioch, who took the name Anna in Hungary, and his court adopted many Byzantine customs. This was a time when Hungary was a bridge between the Latin West and the Byzantine East, a unique cultural and political position. He built a magnificent royal palace and a cathedral in Esztergom, the capital, which were the envy of Europe. His reign was a golden age of sorts, a period of peace, prosperity, and cultural blossoming. The kingdom's wealth was immense, and he was, at the time, one of the wealthiest monarchs in Europe. This wealth came from a variety of sources, including gold and silver mines and tolls on trade routes, but also from the tribute he received from his vassals. Bela III's reign also saw Hungary become a more active player in international politics. He fought successful military campaigns against the Byzantine Empire and the Principality of Halik, expanding the kingdom's influence. He also played a key role in the Third Crusade, providing support and even promising to lead a contingent of his own army, though he died before he could fulfill that pledge. His reign demonstrated that Hungary was no longer a state to be feared or paid off, but a powerful, well-organized kingdom that was a force to be reckoned with. Historians still argue whether his Byzantine-inspired reforms were a genuine effort to modernize the state or simply an adoption of a more sophisticated courtly style. But what's clear is that they had a lasting impact. After Bela III, the kingdom continued to grow, but it also faced new challenges. The power of the great magnates, the powerful landowning families, was growing, and they began to challenge the king's authority. This created a new kind of tension, a tug-of-war between the centralized power of the monarch and the decentralized power of the nobility. It was a problem that would come to a head in the reign of Bela's son, Andrew II, a ruler whose story would be defined by a single document that would forever change the relationship between the king and his subjects. The reign of Andrew II, son of Bela III, was a turbulent period in Hungarian history, a stark contrast to the stability of his father's time. Andrew, who took the throne in 1205, was a very different kind of king. He was known for his generous land grants to his supporters, a policy that, while earning him friends in the short term, proved to be a disaster in the long run. His largesse dramatically weakened royal authority and enriched a powerful class of magnates who began to challenge the king's power. It was like a medieval version of a fire sale, except the king was giving away the kingdom's assets, and the buyers were his most ambitious subjects. The kingdom's finances were in shambles, and the central government was losing control to the great nobles who were becoming little kings in their own right. Andrew II also made a rather questionable decision to participate in the Fifth Crusade, a venture that proved to be a costly failure. He led his army to the Holy Land, but the expedition achieved very little and drained the kingdom's already depleted treasury. This misadventure, combined with his domestic policies, created widespread discontent among the lesser nobility and the free royal servants, who felt they were being exploited by the powerful magnates and ignored by the king. The nobles, who had once been the king's staunchest allies, were now his most vocal critics. They were tired of his extravagant spending, his foreign policies, and his favoritism towards a small group of powerful lords. The culmination of this discontent was the issuance of the Golden Bull of 12.32. This was a landmark document, a charter of liberties that limited the power of the king and established certain rights for the nobility. It was not unlike the Magna Carta in England, and it's a mainstream historical fact that it is a foundational document in the history of Hungarian constitutional law. The Golden Bull was a direct response to Andrew II's abuses of power. It guaranteed the nobles' rights to land ownership, restricted the king's ability to arbitrarily seize property, and most famously, included a clause that gave the nobles the right to resist the king, known as the jus resistendi, if he violated the terms of the charter. This was a monumental concession, a formal recognition that the king's authority was not absolute and that he was subject to the law. The Golden Bull was a turning point. It marked a shift in the balance of power from the monarch to the nobility, a trend that would define Hungarian politics for centuries to come. It was a formal acknowledgement of the decentralized nature of the kingdom and a crucial step toward the development of a representative government. While it didn't solve all of Hungary's problems, the power struggles between the king and the magnates continued. It provided a legal framework for them. It was a contract between the ruler and the ruled, and it set a precedent that would be invoked time and again throughout the kingdom's history. It was a political compromise born out of crisis, but it had a lasting impact on the kingdom's constitutional development. Andrew II's reign was a mix of good intentions and bad decisions, but the Golden Bull remains his most significant legacy. It showed that even in the medieval period, a monarch could be held accountable by his subjects. It was a powerful statement about the limits of power and the importance of law, and it set Hungary on a path towards a more complex and often contentious relationship between the crown and the aristocracy. The kingdom had survived the early struggles of succession and the pagan revolts, and it had now entered a new, more sophisticated phase of political life, one defined by legal documents and constitutional struggles rather than just the swing of a sword. It was an era that would soon be overshadowed by an even greater challenge, a threat from the east that would put the very existence of the kingdom in jeopardy. The Golden Bull of 1222 had attempted to create a more stable political order, but the Kingdom of Hungary was still a patchwork of competing interests. The power of the great magnates had grown to an almost unmanageable level, and the king, Andrew II, was struggling to maintain control. His son, Bela IV, who took the throne in 1235, was a very different kind of ruler. He had a vision of restoring the king's power and centralizing the state. He began by systematically reclaiming the royal lands and castles that his father had so carelessly given away, a move that made him extremely unpopular with the powerful nobles who now considered those lands their own. It was a bold but dangerous gamble. He was trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, and the magnates were not going to let him do it without a fight. Bela IV's reign was a time of internal tension, a silent civil war between the crown and the aristocracy. He was a determined and methodical ruler, but he was also a man who was fighting against the very tide of his era. He was trying to reassert a level of royal authority that had been eroded over decades, and his efforts were met with stubborn resistance. His policies were seen as a threat to the established order, and the nobles, who had grown accustomed to their semi-independent status, were not about to give it up without a struggle. It was a tense and uneasy peace, a standoff that had the potential to erupt into open conflict at any moment. But as Bela IV was attempting to put his house in order, a far greater threat was gathering on the eastern horizon. The Mongol Empire, a terrifying, unstoppable force of nature, was sweeping across Eurasia. Under the leadership of Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongols were a military machine unlike anything Europe had ever seen. They were masters of siege warfare, had a network of spies that provided them with detailed information about their enemies, and their mounted archers were even more formidable than the original Magyars. They had already conquered Kievan Rus and were now setting their sights on Europe. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' initial target was Hungary specifically, or just another stop on a wider campaign. But either way, the Kingdom of Hungary was directly in their path. Béla Tváfr, for all his focus on domestic matters, was aware of the impending danger. He received frantic warnings from the Cumans, a nomadic people who had been driven west by the Mongols and sought refuge in Hungary. He allowed them to settle in his kingdom, a decision that caused a great deal of resentment among the Hungarian nobles, who saw the Cumans as a threat to their lands and way of life. It was a case of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But the Hungarians didn't see the Mongols as a big enough enemy yet to befriend their old foes. When the Mongols finally arrived in 1241, the kingdom was woefully unprepared. The nobles were more concerned with fighting the king than with fighting an outside invader, and the country was politically and militarily fragmented. The invasion itself was swift and brutal. The Mongol army, divided into two main forces, smashed through the Carpathian passes. In the Battle of Mohács in April to 1241, the main Hungarian army was utterly destroyed. It was a devastating defeat that left the kingdom defenseless. The Mongols swept across the country, sacking cities, burning villages, and slaughtering the population. Béla III, barely escaping with his life, was forced to flee to the Adriatic coast. The Kingdom of Hungary, for all its newfound power and sophistication, was on the verge of total annihilation. It was a catastrophic event that would forever change the course of Hungarian history. The Mongol invasion was not just a military defeat. It was a societal collapse, a shockwave that would force the kingdom to rebuild from the ground up. A painful process that would take decades to complete. But it would also give Béla IV a chance to prove his worth in a way he never could have at peace. The year 1241 was a nightmare for the Kingdom of Hungary. After the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Mohács and the subsequent Mongol rampage, the country was in ruins. Towns were sacked, villages were burned, and the population was decimated. The king, Béla III, who had narrowly escaped capture, found himself a king with no kingdom to speak of. He was a man utterly broken, but from the depths of this defeat, he would rise to become one of the most remarkable figures in Hungarian history, earning the moniker the second founder of Hungary. His story is a testament to resilience, a phoenix from the ashes tale that is as compelling as it is tragic. Béla Tváfr's first stroke of luck came unexpectedly. The Mongols, after their brutal campaign, suddenly and mysteriously withdrew from Hungary in 1242. Historians still argue whether this was due to the death of their great Khan, Ögedei Khan, and the subsequent need for the Mongol leaders to return home for the election of a new one, or if it was a planned withdrawal after they had achieved their goals. Whatever the reason, it gave Béla IV a lifeline, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. He returned to a country that was a shell of its former self. The lands were empty, the economy was in tatters, and the political system was in chaos. He realized that his previous policies of reclaiming royal lands had been a mistake. They had alienated the very nobles he now needed to help him rebuild. This time, Bela IV adopted a new strategy. He recognized that to survive, the kingdom needed to be stronger, both militarily and politically. His main priority became fortification. He initiated a massive program of castle building, encouraging his nobles to build stone castles and fortify their towns. He granted them new lands and privileges in exchange for their loyalty and their commitment to building these fortresses. He understood that the old nomadic tactics of hit-and-run warfare were no match for a disciplined enemy with superior siege technology. The new castles, with their thick stone walls, would provide a refuge for the population and a base of operations for a new kind of defense. This was a massive undertaking, and it transformed the Hungarian landscape, turning it into a checkerboard of stone fortresses. Bela IV also sought to repopulate the country. He invited settlers from all over Europe, including German, Walloon, and other colonists, to come and settle the abandoned lands. He offered them generous terms, including freedom from certain feudal obligations and the right to practice their own laws and customs. This influx of new people not only helped to rebuild the population, but also brought new skills and a more modern approach to agriculture and trade. He also, perhaps most importantly, reconciled with the Cumans, the very people whose presence had caused so much resentment before the invasion. He gave them land to settle and integrated them into the kingdom's defense forces, making them a crucial part of his new military strategy. By the end of his long reign in 1270, Bela IV had not only rebuilt the kingdom, but had made it stronger and more resilient than it had ever been. He had learned from his mistakes and had transformed himself from a headstrong, confrontational ruler into a wise and pragmatic one. He had successfully centralized the state, but he had done so with the cooperation of the nobility, not in opposition to them. His reign saw a new wave of urban development, a revival of trade, and a general sense of hope and renewal. While the Mongol invasion had been a catastrophic event, it had also provided the impetus for a complete societal and political reset. Bela IV's legacy was one of survival and rebirth. He had taken a kingdom on the brink of extinction and had given it a new lease on life, a solid foundation that would allow it to grow and prosper for the next several centuries. The reign of Bela IV marked a period of remarkable recovery and rebuilding after the Mongol devastation. But the kingdom was still on a long and winding path. Following his death, the kingdom entered a final messy chapter under the Arpad dynasty. The second half of the 13th century was defined by a steady decline in royal authority, as the great magnates, who had been empowered by Bela's defensive reforms, grew even more powerful. These lords, often called oligarchs by modern historians, built their own castles, raised their own armies, and ruled their vast territories with little regard for the king. It was like the kingdom was being carved up into dozens of tiny fiefdoms, each with its own ruler. The king's power was reduced to a fraction of what it had been. A sad irony, after all the work Bela IV had done to strengthen the state. The last Arpad king, Andrew III, who reigned from 1290 to 1301, was a tragic figure. He was an illegitimate claimant, and his right to the throne was constantly challenged by a slew of rivals, including the Habsburgs and the Angevins. He spent his entire reign fighting to keep his crown. And while he was a capable ruler, he was simply fighting a losing battle against the powerful magnates and the external enemies who sought to exploit Hungary's weakness. He tried to rally the lesser nobility and the burghers to his side, but the great lords, who controlled the vast majority of the kingdom's wealth and military power, were simply too strong. Andrew III's reign was a constant state of crisis, a frantic effort to hold together a kingdom that was already falling apart. His death in 1301 marked a monumental turning point. Andrew III died without a male heir, and with him, the Arpad dynasty, which had ruled Hungary for over 400 years, came to an end. It was a moment of profound change, the close of a long and storied chapter in Hungarian history. For centuries, the Arpad name had been synonymous with the kingdom itself, and now it was gone. The passing of the dynasty plunged the country into a period of interregnum, a brutal, decade-long civil war between various pretenders to the throne. The powerful oligarchs, now completely unchecked, supported their own candidates, and the kingdom was torn apart by competing armies and rival kings. It was a complete breakdown of central authority, a power vacuum that threatened to destroy everything that had been built since the time of Saint Stephen. This interregnum was a chaotic and violent time, but it also set the stage for a new beginning. The nobility, tired of the endless fighting, eventually came to a consensus. They looked to the great royal houses of Europe to find a new king, one who was strong enough to reunite the country and restore order. Their choice would fall upon the House of Anjou, a powerful French royal family that had a claim to the throne through a female line of the Arpad dynasty. This was a significant shift. The crown was now passing to a foreign house, a new bloodline that would bring with it new ideas, new connections, and a completely different style of rule. The end of the Arpad dynasty was not just a historical event. It was a cultural and political reset. It marked the end of an era defined by a single family and the beginning of a new chapter, where Hungary would be more closely integrated with the political and dynastic networks of Western Europe. The old ways were gone, and a new, more cosmopolitan monarchy was on the horizon, ready to take on the challenges of a new century. The death of Andrew III in 1301 and the end of the Arpad dynasty had plunged Hungary into a decade of chaotic civil war. The powerful magnates, who had grown accustomed to their independence, vied for control, each supporting their own candidate for the throne. It was a period of fragmentation and lawlessness, a country without a king. But out of this chaos, a new power emerged, the House of Anjou. They had a claim to the Hungarian throne through Charles Martel of Anjou, who was the grandson of King Stephen V of Hungary. Their candidate was his son, a young man named Charles Robert. After years of bloody fighting and political maneuvering, Charles Robert finally secured the throne in 1310, becoming Charles III of Hungary. His accession marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would see the kingdom not only restored, but elevated to a position of unprecedented power and prestige. Charles was a formidable ruler, a man who understood that to govern, he first had to consolidate his authority. His immediate task was to break the power of the great oligarchs who had been the cause of the interregnum. He did this systematically, using a combination of military force and shrewd diplomacy. He defeated the most powerful of these lords in a series of battles and sieges, including the mighty Matthias, who controlled a huge swath of northern Hungary. This was a long, brutal campaign, but Charles I was relentless. He was a master strategist, and he knew that until these great lords were brought to heel, the kingdom would never be truly united. He also created a new class of loyal nobles, men who owed their positions and their wealth directly to him, and he used them to counter the influence of the old aristocracy. Charles III's reign was also a period of economic reform. He recognized that the kingdom's wealth was its greatest asset, and he took steps to control and exploit it. He reformed the tax system, making it more efficient and fairer, and he took direct control of the kingdom's vast gold and silver mines. Hungary, it turned out, was sitting on a gold mine, literally. The mines of Kremnica and Banska Štiavnica were some of the richest in Europe, and they provided Charles III with a steady stream of income that allowed him to build a powerful standing army and a lavish court. This influx of wealth transformed the kingdom's economy and made Charles one of the wealthiest monarchs on the continent. It's a mainstream historical fact that at one point, Hungary was producing more gold than any other country in Europe. He also pursued an active and successful foreign policy. He built a network of alliances through dynastic marriages, most notably with Poland and Naples. He famously held a summit with the kings of Bohemia and Poland at Visegrad in 1335, a conference that helped to cement a powerful anti-Habsburg alliance and to foster closer ties between the three kingdoms. This summit, which is still remembered today, was a triumph of diplomacy and a clear signal that Hungary was once again a major player on the European stage. He was also a patron of the arts and sciences, and his court at Visegrad became a center of culture and learning. By the time of his death in 1342, Charles I had not only reunited the kingdom, but had also turned it into a prosperous and respected European power. He had broken the power of the oligarchs, reformed the economy, and established a strong, centralized monarchy. He had taken a kingdom on the brink of collapse and had given it a new lease on life. He laid the foundation for his son, Louis III, who would take the kingdom to its absolute zenith, a golden age that would be remembered for centuries. The Anjou dynasty had proven its worth, and Hungary was now ready for its time in the sun. After the death of Charles III, Hungary was blessed with a successor, who was not only capable, but who would lead the kingdom to its greatest height. His son, Louis III, known to history as Louis the Great, took the throne in 1342. His reign, which lasted until 1382, is widely considered the golden age of medieval Hungary, a period of unprecedented military, political, and cultural flourishing. Louis was a true Renaissance prince before the Renaissance even began in full swing, a man who combined the chivalric ideals of the past with the shrewd political mind of the future. He was, to put it simply, the king who had it all, and he used his considerable talents to make his kingdom an absolute powerhouse. Louis's first major move was to continue his father's work in solidifying royal authority. He crushed the last remnants of the oligarch's power, ensuring that the crown's will was the law of the land. He then turned his attention to foreign policy, and here his ambition truly shone. He was a military commander of the first rank, and he led his armies in a series of successful campaigns that expanded Hungary's influence in every direction. He fought wars against Venice for control of the Dalmatian coast, and he waged two lengthy campaigns in the Kingdom of Naples to avenge the murder of his brother, Andrew, who had been married to the Neapolitan queen, Joanna the Thus. These campaigns were a bold move, a medieval version of a family feud that involved entire kingdoms. He didn't manage to conquer Naples, but he did humble the Neapolitan queen and reassert his family's honor. One of Louis's most significant achievements was the personal union of Hungary with Poland. In 1370, when his maternal uncle, Casimir III of Poland, died without a male heir, Louis, as the closest living male relative, inherited the Polish throne. This created a massive empire that stretched from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Adriatic and Black Seas in the south. This union, though personal and not a full political integration, gave Louis an immense amount of power and prestige, making him one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. It also gave Hungary a new set of strategic interests, and its power was now felt far beyond the Carpathian Basin. It's a key point in a long, tangled story that this union was a personal one, meaning the two kingdoms remained separate entities under the same king. Historians still argue whether this was a true union or just a temporary arrangement, but it certainly elevated Hungary's status on the world stage. Beyond his military and political achievements, Louis was also a patron of the arts and education. He founded the first Hungarian university in Pécs in 1367, a sign of his commitment to learning and culture. He reformed the legal system, issuing new decrees that codified the rights and responsibilities of the nobility and the common people. His court was a center of European diplomacy and culture, and his military was a well-organized and professional force, a far cry from the tribal armies of the past. Louis the Great's reign was a high point in Hungarian history, a period of power, prosperity, and cultural achievement that would be remembered as a golden age for centuries to come. He left behind a kingdom that was at the height of its power, a true regional superpower. The death of Louis the Great in 1382 marked the end of Hungary's golden age. Louis died without a male heir, leaving behind two daughters, Mary and Hedwig. Mary inherited the Hungarian throne, while Hedwig was chosen to rule Poland. This separation ended the personal union between the two kingdoms, and it plunged Hungary into a period of chaos and political turmoil. The powerful magnates, who had been kept in check by Louis's strong rule, now saw a chance to regain their independence and influence. They began to scheme and fight among themselves, supporting different claimants to the throne. The Queen, Mary, was a minor and had little control over the situation. It was a stressful time for a teenage queen, trying to navigate a world of power-hungry nobles and foreign rivals. It was like a game of medieval musical chairs, but the chairs were thrones and the players were ruthless lords. The political instability was a feast for the great families who sought to increase their power. The most prominent of these was the Lackfi family, which vied with others for control of the kingdom's politics. This period of infighting and jockeying for power was a direct result of the lack of a strong central authority. The kingdom was once again on the brink of fragmentation. To restore order, a powerful new figure emerged from this chaos. Sigismund of Luxembourg. He was the son of Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV and had been betrothed to Mary of Hungary. He saw a chance to unite the two crowns and to become a major player on the European stage. He was a savvy politician and a man of immense ambition. Sigismund, through a series of shrewd political maneuvers and military campaigns, managed to assert his control over Hungary. He was crowned king in 1387, but his reign was far from peaceful. He spent a significant portion of his early years fighting to secure his power against the rebellious nobles who saw him as a foreigner. He also had to contend with the growing threat from the Ottoman Empire, which was expanding its power in the Balkans. It's a key detail to remember that Sigismund was not just the king of Hungary, he was also the king of Bohemia, and in 1433 he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor. This made him one of the most powerful rulers in Europe, but it also meant his attention was often divided between his many realms. This was a double-edged sword for Hungary. On one hand, it gave the kingdom a powerful ally and a place at the very center of European politics. On the other, it meant the king was often absent and more concerned with the affairs of the Holy Roman Empire than with the domestic issues of Hungary. Sigismund's reign was a mix of triumphs and failures. He was a visionary who understood the importance of a united front against the Ottomans, and he even organized a large-scale crusade, the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396, which ended in a devastating defeat for the Christian forces. This loss was a major blow to European morale, and a clear sign that the Ottoman threat was very real. However, he also founded the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order dedicated to fighting the Ottomans. He was a patron of the arts and sciences, and he brought a cosmopolitan flair to his court. His reign was a long, complex, and often difficult one, but he managed to hold the kingdom together, albeit sometimes by sheer force of will. He had taken a fragmented kingdom, and, by force of his personality and ambition, had given it a new place in the political landscape of Europe, a place that was now defined by the growing threat from the East. The reign of Sigismund of Luxembourg was a period of both great ambition and great peril for Hungary. His attention was often split between his various crowns, and while this elevated Hungary's status, it also left the kingdom vulnerable. The most pressing danger during this time was the steady expansion of the Ottoman Empire into the Balkans. The Ottomans, a new and aggressive power, were a relentless force, and their presence on Hungary's southern border was not just a threat, but a constant, grinding reality. The Kingdom of Hungary, once a regional superpower, now found itself on the front lines of a new and brutal conflict. To make matters worse, Sigismund's focus on his Holy Roman Empire affairs meant that he wasn't always present to deal with the threat, and the Hungarian nobles, still smarting from the loss of their independence, were often more concerned with their own feuds than with the defense of the realm. The kingdom also had to deal with the religious turmoil sweeping through Europe. The Hussite Wars in neighboring Bohemia, a conflict sparked by the religious reformer Jan Hus, who was, ironically, burned at the stake with Sigismund's approval, had a significant impact on Hungary. The Hussites, driven by their fervent religious beliefs, launched raids into northern Hungary, further destabilizing the region and draining the kingdom's resources. Sigismund, as the Holy Roman Emperor, was obligated to fight the Hussites, but his involvement in Bohemia meant that he had even less time and fewer resources to deal with the Ottoman threat. It was a classic case of fighting two fires at once, and both were burning out of control. It was in this chaotic environment that a true hero emerged, a man who would become a legendary figure in Hungarian history, János Hunyadi. He was a brilliant military commander, a commoner by birth, but a magnate by his service to the king. He was a master of warfare, a strategist who understood the new realities of fighting against a disciplined professional army like the Ottomans. Hunyadi rose to prominence by leading a series of successful campaigns against the Ottoman forces. He was a force of nature, a general who inspired his troops and struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. He was a bit like a medieval superhero, always appearing just when things looked their darkest. In 1446, after the death of King Albert, a short-lived successor to Sigismund, János Hunyadi was elected as the regent of Hungary. This was a monumental moment. A man who was not of royal blood was now the de facto ruler of the kingdom. He took on the full responsibility of defending the realm, and he did so with remarkable success. He led a major crusade against the Ottomans in 1443-1444, a campaign that ended in a devastating defeat at the Battle of Varna, but which, for a brief moment, gave hope to a terrified Europe. Despite the loss, Hunyadi's reputation as a tireless defender of Christendom grew. He was, for all intents and purposes, the true ruler of the kingdom, a man who was more concerned with saving his country than with the trappings of power. His relentless campaigning against the Ottomans, culminating in the siege of Belgrade in 1456, was a testament to his determination and skill. The victory at Belgrade was a major psychological blow to the Ottomans and a massive relief for all of Europe. It was a clear demonstration that the Ottomans could, in fact, be stopped. Hunyadi had single-handedly pushed back the tide, and in doing so, he had saved his kingdom. He died shortly after the victory at Belgrade, a victim of the plague, but his legacy was secure. He had not only defended Hungary, but had also created a new kind of hero for the nation, a man who had risen through merit, not birth, and whose life's work was the defense of his homeland. His death left a huge hole, but it also set the stage for the rise of his son, a man who would not only continue his father's legacy, but would take the kingdom to new heights. Following the death of the great regent János Hunyadi, the Kingdom of Hungary faced another succession crisis. The powerful magnates, who had long chafed under Hunyadi's authority, saw a chance to regain their power. The throne was up for grabs, and the kingdom was once again on the brink of civil war. But from the chaos emerged a new king, the son of the great hero himself, Matthias Hunyadi. He was a young man, only 15 years old, but he was shrewd, intelligent, and possessed an ambition that would rival any king before him. He was elected king by the Diet in 1458, largely thanks to the support of the lesser nobility, who saw him as their champion against the powerful lords. He was crowned as Matthias III, and he would come to be known as Matthias Corvinus, a name that would be synonymous with Hungary's Renaissance. Matthias was a different kind of king. He was a true product of his time, a ruler who understood the importance of both military strength and cultural sophistication. His first order of business was to consolidate his power and bring the rebellious magnates to heel. He was a master of political maneuvering, and he used a combination of force and diplomacy to assert his authority. He was ruthless when he needed to be, but he was also a pragmatic ruler who understood the need for compromise. He spent the early years of his reign fighting off rival claimants and putting down rebellions. But once he had secured his throne, he began to build a kingdom that would be the envy of Europe. Perhaps Matthias's most famous achievement was his military reform. He recognized that the feudal levies, the old system of calling on nobles to provide troops, were no longer sufficient to deal with the threats from the Ottomans and other European powers. He created a standing mercenary army, a professional force known as the Black Army. This was a radical idea for its time. The Black Army was a well-paid, well-trained, and highly disciplined force that was loyal only to the king. It was composed of a mix of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and it was a military machine that was far superior to the old feudal armies. With the Black Army, Matthias could project his power and defend his borders without having to rely on the unpredictable support of his nobles. It's a key detail that the Black Army's existence was funded by a new, more efficient system of taxation, which made it a symbol of both his military might and his administrative genius. Matthias was also a great patron of the arts and sciences. His court at Buda was a center of the Italian Renaissance in Central Europe. He surrounded himself with scholars, artists, and humanists from all over the continent. He commissioned magnificent buildings, including the royal palace at Buda, and he created the Bibliotheca Corviniana, one of the largest and most important libraries in all of Europe. He was a man who loved books, and he spent a fortune on collecting manuscripts and commissioning copies of ancient texts. His library was a symbol of his commitment to learning, and a testament to his belief that a great kingdom was not just defined by its military power, but also by its cultural achievements. Matthias Corvinus was a true Renaissance king, a man who brought a new spirit of innovation and enlightenment to Hungary. He had taken a kingdom that was on the brink of collapse and had transformed it into a powerful, prosperous, and culturally vibrant state. He was, like his father, a national hero, a symbol of a time when Hungary was at the very top of its game. His reign was a golden age of sorts, a period of strength and stability that would unfortunately be followed by a period of decline after his death. But for a brief and shining moment, Hungary was the very center of Central Europe, and it was all thanks to the vision of one man. The creation of the Black Army under Matthias Corvinus was a military innovation that set Hungary apart from its neighbors. This was a professional, standing mercenary force, something almost unheard of in medieval Europe. The kings of the time relied on feudal levies, which were armies of knights and soldiers provided by the nobility in exchange for land and favors. The problem with feudal levies was that they were unreliable, often poorly trained, and only served for a limited time. A lord might not show up if he didn't like the king. And even if he did, his troops were probably better at farming than fighting. Matthias, a pragmatist to his core, saw this as a major weakness, and he decided to do something about it. The Black Army was a complete game changer. It was composed of a diverse group of soldiers from all over Europe: Germans, Czechs, Poles, and even some Hungarians who were paid a regular salary. This made them loyal to the king, not to a particular lord. They were highly trained, disciplined, and had access to the latest military technology, including artillery and early firearms. The army was well organized, with a clear hierarchy and a system of logistics that ensured it could be deployed quickly and effectively. It was a military machine, a mobile force that could be used for both defense and offense. One could almost hear the clank of their armor and the rhythmic march of their boots as they moved across the countryside. It's a very interesting tidbit that the name Black Army is often attributed to the black armor they wore. But historians still argue whether this is true, or if it was a more recent nickname. Matthias used his Black Army to great effect. He successfully defended his kingdom against the Ottomans, leading a series of campaigns that pushed them back from Hungary's borders. He also used the army to expand his power in Central Europe. He conquered parts of Austria and even captured Vienna, making it his new capital for a time. His military campaigns were not just about conquest. They were about asserting Hungary's dominance in the region and ensuring its security. The Black Army was a symbol of Matthias's power and his vision for a strong, centralized state. It allowed him to project his authority far beyond Hungary's borders and to make his kingdom a major player in European politics. However, the Black Army was incredibly expensive to maintain. It was funded by a new system of taxation, including a special tax on the common people. This tax, while necessary for the kingdom's defense, was a heavy burden on the population and was a source of great resentment. After Matthias's death, the nobles, who had always opposed the standing army, saw a chance to get rid of it. They considered the Black Army a threat to their own power, a tool that allowed the king to bypass their feudal obligations and to rule without their consent. They wanted a return to the old ways, where the king was more of a first among equals than an absolute ruler. The fate of the Black Army is a sad one. After Matthias's death, the army's funding was cut by the new king, and the soldiers, no longer paid, went rogue. They roamed the countryside, pillaging and looting, before they were finally disbanded. It was a tragic end for one of the most innovative military forces of the medieval period. The end of the Black Army marked a turning point, a clear signal that the kingdom was entering a period of decline. The nobles had won their power struggle against the king, but in doing so, they had weakened the kingdom and left it vulnerable to the very threats that Matthias had worked so hard to defeat. With the death of Matthias Corvinus in 1490 and the disbanding of his elite Black Army, the golden age of Hungary came to a crashing halt. The powerful magnates who had chafed under Matthias's centralized rule had finally won. They chose a new king, Vladislaus II, from the Jagiellonian dynasty of Poland and Bohemia. He was a weak and indecisive ruler, a king who was more concerned with placating his nobles than with governing the kingdom. He was famously known as King Dobrze, meaning King OK in Czech, because he would often agree to any noble's request with a simple Dobrze. It was a clear sign of his lack of authority, a far cry from the strong, centralized rule of Matthias and Louis the Great. This new era, known as the Jagiellonian dynasty, was a period of decline and political fragmentation. The power of the great lords, which had been checked by Matthias, now grew to an unprecedented level. They seized back the lands and privileges they had lost, and they dominated the royal council, essentially ruling the kingdom from behind the scenes. The king was little more than a puppet, a figurehead who lacked the will or the power to challenge the magnates. The central government was weakened, and the royal treasury, which had been so full during Matthias's reign, was now empty. The lack of a standing army meant that the kingdom was once again vulnerable to internal strife and external threats. The decline was not just political, it was also economic and social. The great lords, now unconstrained, exploited the common people and the lesser nobility. They introduced a new form of serfdom, tying the peasants to the land and forcing them into a state of near slavery. This led to widespread discontent and, in 1514, a massive peasant revolt led by György Dócsa. The revolt, while brutally suppressed, was a clear sign of the deep-seated social problems that were festering beneath the surface of the kingdom. It also had a terrible consequence. In response to the revolt, the Diet of Hungary passed a law that formally declared perpetual serfdom for the peasants, an act that would have a lasting and tragic impact on Hungarian society. The greatest threat, however, remained the Ottoman Empire. They had not forgotten the humiliating defeat at Belgrade, and they were now stronger than ever, their sights set on Hungary as the gateway to Central Europe. The Hungarian kingdom, weakened by internal conflict and a lack of a strong central army, was in no position to defend itself. The magnates were too busy fighting among themselves to form a united front, and the king was powerless to compel them. It was a ticking time bomb, a kingdom waiting to fall. The memory of the great victories of János Hunyadi and Matthias Corvinus was fading, and with it, the will to resist. The reign of the Jagiellonian kings was a long, slow period of decay, a sad end to the power and prestige that Hungary had enjoyed for centuries. The kingdom, once a regional superpower, was now a fragmented and vulnerable state. The political system was broken, the economy was in shambles, and the social fabric was tearing apart. It was a dark and dangerous time, a prelude to the final, catastrophic moment that would seal the kingdom's fate and bring the entire medieval era to a tragic end. The stage was set for the final act, a brutal and decisive battle that would forever change the course of Hungarian history. The reign of the Jagiellonian kings was a long, slow period of decline, a sad end to the power and prestige that Hungary had enjoyed for centuries. The kingdom, once a regional superpower, was now a fragmented and vulnerable state. The political system was broken, the economy was in shambles, and the social fabric was tearing apart. It was a dark and dangerous time, a prelude to the final, catastrophic moment that would seal the kingdom's fate and bring the entire medieval era to a tragic end. The stage was set for the final act, a brutal and decisive battle that would forever change the course of Hungarian history. In 1526, the Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, a man whose name was a perfect reflection of his power and ambition, led a massive army of over 60,000 men into Hungary. His goal was simple: to break the Hungarian kingdom and open the door to Central Europe. The Hungarian king at the time was the young and inexperienced Louis II. He was only 20 years old, and he was completely out of his depth. He had a kingdom that was bitterly divided, a nobility that was more concerned with its own petty feuds than with the defense of the realm, and a treasury that was empty. It was a recipe for disaster. The Hungarian army, a patchwork of noble levies and a small group of royal troops, was a shadow of its former self. It was far smaller than the Ottoman force, and it was poorly equipped and led. Despite this, Louis II, pushed by his nobles, decided to meet the Ottomans on the battlefield. The two armies met on August 29th, 1526, near the town of Mohács. The Battle of Mohács was not a battle. It was a massacre. The Hungarian army was completely outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by the superior numbers and tactics of the Ottoman army. The battle lasted only a few hours, and at the end of it, the Hungarian army was utterly annihilated. The loss was catastrophic. King Louis II himself was killed in the chaos of the retreat, drowning in a swamp as he tried to escape. The flower of the Hungarian nobility was also wiped out, including 7 bishops and 28 barons. The loss of life was staggering, and the political consequences were even greater. The Hungarian kingdom, already weakened, was now headless and defenseless. The Ottoman army swept through the country, sacking cities, including the capital, Buda, and taking tens of thousands of people into slavery. The Battle of Mohács was a turning point, a mainstream historical fact that marked the end of Hungary as an independent, unified kingdom. It was a defeat so profound that it would become a symbol of national tragedy for centuries to come. It was the moment the music stopped and the kingdom fell. The defeat at Mohács was the beginning of the end. The kingdom was now a prize to be fought over by the great powers of Europe. The Ottoman Empire, which had just won a decisive victory, was now in control of a significant portion of the country. The Habsburgs, who had a dynastic claim to the throne through a marriage treaty, saw a chance to expand their empire. The Hungarian nobles, who were still fighting among themselves, were now forced to choose a side. This was not just a battle. It was a seismic event that would reshape the map of Central Europe for the next 150 years. The kingdom had fallen, and a new, more complicated chapter was about to begin. one where the old, unified Hungary would be no more. The catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Mohács in 1526 did not just end a reign, it shattered the entire Kingdom of Hungary. With King Louis II dead and the Ottoman army occupying the central part of the country, the kingdom was thrown into a state of total chaos. The Hungarian nobles, who had so gleefully undermined the power of the Jagiellonian kings, were now faced with the consequences of their actions. The kingdom was headless and defenseless, and the only question was who would fill the power vacuum. The answer, as it turned out, was two men, each with a legitimate claim to the throne, each supported by a different faction, and each determined to rule over what was left of the country. This was the beginning of the tripartite division, a period of over 150 years, where Hungary would be torn apart by competing powers. The two claimants were Ferdinand of Habsburg, brother of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles III, and John Zápolyia, a powerful Hungarian magnate and the voivode of Transylvania. Ferdinand had a dynastic claim to the throne through a marriage treaty with the Jagiellonians, while John Zápolyia was the choice of the Hungarian nobles who wanted to elect a Hungarian king. The kingdom was now split down the middle, with the civil war raging even as the Ottoman threat loomed larger than ever. John Zápolyia was crowned king, but Ferdinand's forces soon occupied the western and northern parts of the country, forcing John to seek help from the very enemy he was supposed to be fighting. In a moment of tragic irony, John Zápolyia turned to Suleiman the Magnificent for support against Ferdinand. The Sultan, ever the master strategist, was more than happy to help, as it meant he could play the two sides against each other and keep Hungary weak. The result of this political mess was the tripartite division of Hungary. By the middle of the 16th century, the kingdom was formally divided into three parts: Royal Hungary, which was a strip of land in the west and north under Habsburg control; the Ottoman-occupied Central Hungary, which was directly ruled by the Turks; and the Principality of Transylvania, which was an autonomous vassal state under Ottoman suzerainty. This division was not just a political arrangement. It was a complete societal and cultural reset. The people in the three regions lived under different rulers, had different laws, and faced different futures. The unified medieval kingdom of Hungary was no more. Royal Hungary, under the rule of the Catholic Habsburgs, became a part of their vast multi-ethnic empire. The Habsburgs saw Hungary as a crucial buffer against the Ottomans, and they poured resources into fortifying the border and fighting a long, draining series of wars with the Turks. This period saw the rise of magnificent forts and castles, as the borderlands became a military frontier. Ottoman Hungary, on the other hand, was a world of its own. The Turks introduced a new system of administration and taxation, and many Hungarians converted to Islam or were forced into slavery. The mosques and minarets of the Ottoman era still stand today as a testament to this period. Transylvania, as an autonomous state, was a unique entity. It was a haven for religious tolerance and a center of Hungarian culture, as its princes, who were vassals of the Sultan, often played a delicate game of diplomacy with both the Ottomans and the Habsburgs. The tripartite division was the final tragic chapter of medieval Hungary, the kingdom that had been born out of the chaos of the nomadic raids and built up by great kings like Stephen and Louis, was now gone. The legacy of this division would linger for centuries, shaping the modern identity of Hungary and its relationship with its neighbors. The dream of a unified kingdom would not be realized again for over 150 years. And even then, it would be under the rule of a foreign power. The story of medieval Hungary, from its wild nomadic beginnings to its glorious golden age and its tragic end, is a reminder that even the greatest kingdoms can fall, and that the past, for all its glory, can be a heavy burden to bear. It's a story of ambition, power, and the ultimate fragility of nations. The tripartite division of Hungary was a long, painful, and complex period. And while the kingdom of medieval Hungary had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist, its legacy lived on. The Habsburgs in the west, the Ottomans in the center, and the Hungarian princes in Transylvania all laid claim to the Hungarian crown. And for over a century, the three parts of the country were locked in a constant state of war, both hot and cold. The dream of a unified kingdom, which had been so strong during the Golden Age, was now just a distant memory. This long, drawn-out period of division saw a constant back and forth of skirmishes, sieges, and political maneuvering, a long and weary grind that left the country exhausted. In royal Hungary, the Habsburgs, who were now the recognized kings of Hungary, saw the kingdom as a crucial borderland, a line of defense against the Ottoman tide. They built a chain of fortresses along the border, manned by German and other foreign troops, and they levied heavy taxes on the Hungarian people to pay for their wars. This created a great deal of resentment, as the Hungarians felt that they were being treated more like a conquered province than a co-equal part of the Habsburg Empire. The Hungarian Diet, which still existed, was a constant source of friction, as it tried to assert its rights and resist the centralizing tendencies of the Habsburgs. It was a tug-of-war that would define the relationship between the Hungarians and the Habsburgs for centuries to come. In the Ottoman-occupied central part of the country, a different kind of reality took hold. The Ottoman Turks ruled directly, and they transformed the landscape and the culture. They built mosques and baths, introduced their own legal and administrative systems, and levied taxes on the population. The Hungarian nobility either fled to royal Hungary or to Transylvania, and the common people were left to fend for themselves under their new rulers. The great cities of the Hungarian plain, like Buda and Szeged, became centers of Ottoman power and influence. It was a new world, a new way of life that was alien to the Hungarians. And for 150 years, they lived under the rule of a completely different civilization. But the real heart of Hungarian nationalism and culture during this time was the Principality of Transylvania. It was a small, autonomous state, a land of mountains and valleys, that was a vassal of the Ottoman Sultan. The Transylvanian princes, who were all Hungarian, played a delicate game of diplomacy, balancing their loyalty to the Ottomans with their cultural and political ties to the Hungarians in the West. This difficult balancing act allowed Transylvania to become a haven for Hungarian culture, a place where the language, the customs, and the sense of national identity were preserved. It was a place where religious tolerance flourished, a rare thing in the 16th century, and it was a beacon of hope for a future unified Hungary. The tripartite division was a long, sad chapter in Hungarian history, but it also had a powerful and lasting legacy. It solidified the Hungarian national identity as the people in all three parts of the country, despite their different rulers, held on to the idea of a single unified Hungary. The period also produced some of the greatest heroes and writers of Hungarian history, men who fought tirelessly for the dream of a free and united kingdom. The end of medieval Hungary was not a clean break, but a long, slow fade into a new era, an era defined by foreign rule and a constant struggle for freedom. The dream of a unified Hungary, which had been born under Stephen the First and had flourished under Louis the Great, was not dead. It was just sleeping, waiting for a new hero to wake it up. The long drawn-out period of the tripartite division, while a time of decline, also gave birth to a new kind of Hungarian identity. The dream of a unified kingdom was not dead. It had simply gone underground, kept alive in the hearts of the people and in the cultural life of Transylvania. The Hungarian princes of Transylvania, though vassals of the Ottoman Sultan, saw themselves as the true heirs of the Arpad and Anjou kings. They were the keepers of the flame, the ones who preserved the Hungarian language, culture, and traditions in a world that was increasingly dominated by foreign powers. One of the most famous of these princes was Gabriel Bethlen, a man who would become a hero to the Hungarians in their darkest hour. Bethlen, who ruled Transylvania from 1613 to 1629, was a true Renaissance prince. He was a master of diplomacy, a military commander, and a patron of the arts and sciences. He understood the delicate balance of power in the region, and he played the Habsburgs and the Ottomans against each other with great skill. He used his wealth, much of it from Transylvania's rich gold mines, to build a magnificent court and to create a professional army. He was also a champion of religious tolerance, and he welcomed Protestants and other minorities to his principality, making Transylvania a beacon of freedom in a continent that was still reeling from the religious wars. His reign was a brief golden age for Transylvania, a reminder of what the old Kingdom of Hungary had been. But the long-term reality of the tripartite division was one of constant warfare and political instability. The Habsburgs and the Ottomans were locked in a constant struggle for control of the Hungarian lands, and the Hungarians themselves were often caught in the middle. The wars were brutal and devastating, and they left the country in ruins. The Hungarian people, who had once been a proud and powerful nation, were now reduced to pawns in a great power game. The cities and towns of central Hungary were depopulated. The fields were left fallow, and the once thriving economy was in shambles. The legacy of this period was one of bitterness and a deep-seated distrust of foreign powers. The end of the tripartite division would not come until the late 17th century. The Ottoman Empire, which had been so powerful for so long, was now in decline. The Habsburgs, who had grown stronger and more centralized, were ready to go on the offensive. In 1683, the Ottomans launched a final massive assault on Vienna, but they were defeated at the Battle of Vienna. a major turning point in European history. This defeat was the beginning of the end for the Ottomans in Hungary. Over the next 15 years, a series of military campaigns led by the brilliant Austrian general Prince Eugene of Savoy pushed the Turks out of Hungary once and for all. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1619 officially ended the Ottoman occupation of Hungary and reunited the country. But it was not a joyous occasion for all. The new, unified Hungary was now a part of the Habsburg Empire, and while the Turks were gone, the Hungarians were now under the rule of another foreign power. The Habsburgs were not interested in restoring the old kingdom. They were interested in integrating Hungary into their empire and centralizing their control. This new political reality was a bitter pill to swallow for the Hungarians. The dream of a unified, independent Hungary had been realized, but it had come at a heavy price. The medieval kingdom was gone forever, and a new chapter, one of a long and difficult struggle for national identity and autonomy within a larger empire, was about to begin. The final fall of medieval Hungary was not a single moment, but a slow, grinding process that had lasted for over a century and a half. A long, sad fade into a new and uncertain future. The end of the tripartite division was a moment of profound change for Hungary. The Ottoman Turks were gone, but the dream of a unified, independent Hungarian kingdom was not realized. Instead, the country was now a part of the vast, multi-ethnic Habsburg Empire. The Habsburg rulers, who now held the Hungarian crown, were not interested in restoring the old kingdom. Their goal was to integrate Hungary into their centralized empire and to assert their authority over the rebellious Hungarian nobility. This new political reality was a bitter pill for the Hungarians to swallow. The country that had once been a regional superpower was now a subordinate province, a crucial borderland in a much larger empire. The relationship between the Habsburgs and the Hungarians was, to put it mildly, complicated. The Habsburgs saw the Hungarians as a difficult and rebellious people who needed to be brought to heel. They introduced a series of reforms designed to centralize their power, including a new system of taxation and a professional standing army. They also tried to impose their Catholic religion on the predominantly Protestant Hungarian nobility, which created a great deal of religious tension. The Hungarian nobles, for their part, were not about to give up their ancient rights and privileges. They saw the Habsburgs as foreign rulers who were trying to destroy their traditions and their way of life. The result was a long, drawn-out political struggle, a constant tug of war between the centralizing power of the Habsburgs and the rebellious spirit of the Hungarians. This period was not without its heroes. The most prominent of these was Francis II Rákóczi, a Hungarian prince who led a massive uprising against Habsburg rule in the early 18th century. His rebellion, known as Rákóczi's War of Independence, was a monumental effort to restore Hungarian sovereignty. He was a charismatic leader, a man who inspired his people to fight for their freedom. His army, a motley crew of peasants and nobles, fought a long and bloody war against the superior Habsburg forces. Rákóczi's rebellion was a clear signal to the world that the Hungarian spirit was not broken, and that the dream of a free and independent kingdom was still very much alive. However, Despite some early successes, the rebellion was ultimately defeated, and Rákóczi was forced into exile. The legacy of medieval Hungary was not lost in this struggle. The memory of the great kings, the powerful kingdom, and the heroic resistance to foreign invasion became a source of national pride and a rallying cry for future generations. The Hungarian nobility, for all its infighting, held on to its historical rights and traditions, and the Hungarian language and culture were preserved in the face of German and Ottoman influence. The stories of St. Stephen, Louis the Great, and János Hunyadi became a part of the national mythos, a powerful reminder of a time when Hungary was a sovereign and powerful nation. The end of the medieval kingdom of Hungary was not just a historical event, it was a cultural and psychological one. The country had gone from a regional superpower to a subordinate province in a little over a century, and the sense of loss and humiliation was profound. The long, slow decline from the death of Matthias Corvinus to the tripartite division and the final integration into the Habsburg Empire was a sad and tragic chapter. But it was also a period that forged a new kind of Hungarian identity, one that was defined by a fierce sense of patriotism and a relentless struggle for independence. The medieval era was over, and a new, more complicated chapter of Hungarian history had begun, one that would see the Hungarians fight for their place in a new world order. The fall of the medieval Hungarian kingdom was a long, drawn-out process, not a single event. It began with the political decline under the Jagiellonian kings and culminated in the catastrophic Battle of Mohács in 1526. The years following that battle saw the country's complete fragmentation into three parts, a reality that would last for over 150 years. The dream of a unified kingdom, which had been born under the Arpad dynasty and reached its zenith under the Anjous, was now a distant memory, replaced by a complex and often brutal political reality. The story of the kingdom's final fall is a tragic one, a cautionary tale of a great nation that lost its way due to internal strife and a lack of foresight. The legacy of medieval Hungary, however, did not die with the kingdom. It lived on in the institutions, the culture, and the national consciousness of the Hungarian people. The Golden Bull of 1222, which guaranteed the rights of the nobility, would be invoked time and again as a foundation of Hungarian constitutional law. The memory of the great kings, like Saint Stephen Fontes, who had laid the foundation for the kingdom, and Louis the Great, who had brought it to its golden age, became a source of national pride and a rallying cry for future generations. The heroic resistance of János Hunyadi and the cultural achievements of Matthias Corvinus became a part of the national mythos, a powerful reminder of a time when Hungary was a sovereign and powerful nation. The fall of the kingdom was not an end, but a transformation, a transition from a medieval state to a modern one that would be defined by a long and difficult struggle for national identity and autonomy. The tripartite division was a long, sad chapter, but it was also a crucible that forged a new kind of Hungarian identity. The people, now living under different rulers, were united by a common language, a shared history, and a powerful sense of patriotism. The Hungarian language, for example, flourished in Transylvania, where it was the language of the court and of government. The long struggle against the Ottomans and the Habsburgs instilled a fierce sense of independence and a deep-seated distrust of foreign powers. The story of medieval Hungary is not just a tale of rise and fall. It is a story of resilience, of a people who, despite overwhelming odds, held on to their identity and their dreams. The end of the medieval kingdom was a painful loss, but it was a loss that ultimately strengthened the Hungarian spirit and set the stage for the modern nation that would eventually emerge. The final end of the unified medieval Hungarian kingdom, while a tragedy, also gave birth to a powerful legacy. It left behind a story of a people who rose from obscurity to build a great kingdom, who fought valiantly against overwhelming odds, and who, despite a catastrophic fall, never lost their sense of self. The castles, the cathedrals, the legal codes, and the literary works of the medieval period were not just relics of the past. They were the building blocks of the future, a testament to the enduring power of a nation's history and its ability to inspire future generations. The story of medieval Hungary, from the nomadic raids to the tripartite division, is a long and winding one, but it is a story that, in the end, is about the triumph of the human spirit. The final, tragic chapter of the Hungarian kingdom story is a profound lesson in how a great power can unravel. It wasn't a single act of betrayal, but a long, slow fade that began with the political decay under the Jagiellonian kings and culminated in the catastrophic Battle of Mohács. The kingdom, which had once been a regional superpower, was now a geopolitical pawn, a borderland between two great empires. But the story doesn't end there. The legacy of medieval Hungary, forged in the fires of conflict and tempered by centuries of struggle, lived on. It was a legacy of resilience, of a people who, despite a catastrophic fall, never lost their sense of self. The modern nation of Hungary, for all its struggles, is a direct descendant of that medieval kingdom. The Hungarian state today is built on the legal and constitutional foundations that were laid by Saint Stephen V and codified in the Golden Bull of 1222. The memory of the great kings, the powerful kingdom, and the heroic resistance to foreign invasion became a source of national pride and a rallying cry for future generations. The heroic resistance of János Hunyadi and the cultural achievements of Matthias Corvinus became a part of the national mythos, a powerful reminder of a time when Hungary was a sovereign and powerful nation. The fall of the kingdom was not an end, but a transformation, a transition from a medieval state to a modern one that would be defined by a long and difficult struggle for national identity and autonomy. The tripartite division was a long, sad chapter, but it was also a crucible that forged a new kind of Hungarian identity. The people, now living under different rulers, were united by a common language, a shared history, and a powerful sense of patriotism. The Hungarian language, for example, flourished in Transylvania, where it was the language of the court and of government. The long struggle against the Ottomans and the Habsburgs instilled a fierce sense of independence and a deep-seated distrust of foreign powers. The story of medieval Hungary is not just a tale of rise and fall. It is a story of resilience, of a people who, despite overwhelming odds, held on to their identity and their dreams. The end of the medieval kingdom was a painful loss, but it was a loss that ultimately strengthened the Hungarian spirit and set the stage for the modern nation that would eventually emerge. The final fall of the unified medieval Hungarian kingdom, while a tragedy, also gave birth to a powerful legacy. It left behind a story of a people who rose from obscurity to build a great kingdom, who fought valiantly against overwhelming odds, and who, despite a catastrophic fall, never lost their sense of self. The castles, the cathedrals, the legal codes, and the literary works of the medieval period were not just relics of the past. They were the building blocks of the future, a testament to the enduring power of a nation's history and its ability to inspire future generations. The story of medieval Hungary, from the nomadic raids to the tripartite division, is a long and winding one, but it is a story that, in the end, is about the triumph of the human spirit. And so, as we reach the end of this long and sprawling story, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've seen. From a band of nomadic raiders to a powerful European kingdom, the journey of medieval Hungary was full of stunning triumphs and heartbreaking tragedies. It was a story of great kings, heroic battles, and a fierce, unyielding spirit. The echoes of those centuries still resonate today. A whisper on the wind, a memory held in the very earth of the Carpathian Basin. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can picture the distant sound of hooves on the plains, the clank of armor in a besieged castle, or the quiet murmur of monks in a monastery. These sounds are a part of a past that is gone but not forgotten, a history that, in its own way, is still very much alive. Rest now and let the long, strange history of this fascinating land be a part of your dreams.